There's been a really lot of blurred, attempts to explain what really happened to Stevie Biko in prison. Stevie Biko was actually this, interesting figure in the Black emancipatory movement, where, at the core of the Black struggle, he actually spoke about, Black consciousness and the importance of Black consciousness in the emergence of Black South African going forward in the build up to the post-apartheid South Africa. But at some point he was imprisoned, and suddenly it actually spoke to the fact that he actually passed away or died in prison. Many people didn't really understand the behind the scenes around that. But Helen Zille is actually one of those journalist at the time who was really vociferous. He spoke a lot about, Stevie Biko, and tried to follow the case, and many things were hidden at the time. But now she's actually exposing the truth about Stevie Biko, and what killed Stevie Biko, and why Stevie Biko died the way he did, and what probably would have been his prospect in the emergence of a Black majority, a strong Black consciousness among the Black majority in South Africa. Let's quickly listen to Helen Zille actually break this down. Although really, really strange that, at the point where, Black and white relationship in South Africa is actually antagonistic at the moment, a white South African was at the helm of things in trying to prove I think the legitimacy of Stevie Biko's fight for Black consciousness in South Africa. Let's quickly listen to Helen Zille break this down, especially the truth about the death of Stevie Biko, and share your thoughts in the comments.
The Biko story, when you went to the Rand Daily Mail, of course, has become something of legend. Can you help us understand a bit more the role you played in uncovering what had happened with Biko's death, and separate fact from fiction in terms of that story and how you fit into it?
Well, you will remember that on the 12th of September, 1977, Jimmy Kruger, who was then the Minister of Justice, announced that Steve Biko had died after going on a hunger strike. And his strong implication was that he had starved himself to death. Now, if anybody knew that you don't starve yourself to death overnight or over a week after you were detained, it was me, And Biko was a big man. He wasn't, wasn't small and
I didn't realize that.
Fragile. He was a big man. And, I knew immediately it was a lie, and everybody knew it was a lie. You don't go in and stop eating on the Monday, and the next Monday you're dead. It doesn't work that way. So we had to get to the truth. And Jimmy Kruger was saying things that leaves me cold, he's not interested, and move on. Now, Steve Biko was a very big name, and he was a big name when I was at university as well, because he broke with NUSAS, the National Union of South African Students that I was involved with. Right. He broke with that, and he said, "Black man, you're on your own," basically. And it was a huge initiator of much debate amongst the non-racial student movement. So he became a big figure, and then he was murdered. And we knew he was murdered, and I had a very good editor, Alistair Sparks, who said to me, "We have to get to the bottom of this." And I said, "Yes, we do. It's going to be difficult." Now, what happened then was that we made contact with a doctor who was the private pathologist of the Biko family. And he was prepared to talk to us. But he said, "If you reveal your sources, I am done for." So he said Biko died of brain damage. There was blood cells in his spinal fluid, and that only happens when you've got brain damage. And he said the lumbar puncture and the autopsy showed that he died of brain damage. But we couldn't publish any of the medical papers, and we couldn't reveal our sources. His name was Dr. Gluckman. And we promised him that we wouldn't reveal the source, but I can speak about it now because he's passed on.
I see.
He passed on long ago. And he was really a hero, but at the time he was very frightened about what would happen. So Alistair said, well, we've got to be able to use this information without compromising him. So he sent me off to speak to the doctors who had seen Steve Biko in Port Elizabeth. And they were a Dr. Lang, a Dr. Tucker, and a Dr. Hirsch. And Dr. Lang and Dr. Tucker were district surgeons. And they were very hostile to me. They'd obviously seen Steve Biko after he'd been assaulted and when he was unconscious, and they didn't know whether he was shamming or not. That became a big part of the debate. And they wouldn't speak to me. They kicked me out, and Lang was the worst. He said he'd put his dogs onto me, but Tucker was almost as bad. And then I went to see Dr. Hirsch. And Dr. Hirsch was different. He invited me in. He said, sit down. He said, look, I can't talk about it because I acted on behalf of the state, and I was the specialist neurologist that was brought in, but things are not what they seem, and terrible things happened. That's all he would say to me. And then he said to me, but I can tell you this, there was no sign of a hunger strike. That's what he said to me. So I went back to Alistair and I said, what we've got is that we can say definitively that he didn't die of a hunger strike. That we can say definitively.
Yeah.
And we can say definitively that the truth has not been told. And then we published it in a story that said no sign of hunger strike, Biko doctors. But then they demanded to know which doctors had said that, and they took me to the press council, and there was a judge there who said, when I refused to reveal my sources, obviously, the judge said I was guilty of misleading and tendentious reporting. Now, I knew we had all the facts right, and so did Alistair, and we'd even seen the medical report from Dr. Gluckman. So we knew our story was accurate, but the press council found that we were guilty of tendentious and misleading reporting. And when you're a young journalist, that's a terrible thing for a judge to say about you, because you think that's the end of my journalistic career. And I felt so bad that I went into my newspaper and I offered them my resignation. I said, you know, this also reflects on the newspaper. A judge has said this about me, and I offer you my resignation. And they said, are you mad? We know that you've told the truth and you're not going to resign. Those kinds of things make you tough. Because Alistair said to me, listen, don't be ridiculous. We know this is true. And if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. And I said, well, I'm happy to be in the kitchen, but I'm doing the honorable thing by my newspaper. And he said, oh, no, you're not. You stand by your story. If it's the truth, you stand by it. And through millions of those experiences throughout your life, that's how you get tough. You're not born like that. You get like that through good guidance, through good experience, through learning the right lessons. And Alistair said, well, the most important thing about this is that we will prevent a cover-up. And then we did. And then I covered the inquest. And in the inquest, all those medical details were pulled out by Sidney Kentridge, who was the chief advocate there, and did a brilliant job of pulling it all out. And so, that is the story.
Now it seems so obvious, but did you go through moments of doubt when you were trying to verify whether, you know, the story was in fact a cover-up?
Well, one thing I absolutely knew for sure was that Biko did not die of a hunger strike. Now, you don't just die in jail when you've been arrested for a week. And, you know, they came up with all kinds of stories. People slipped on a bar of soap. People did this. I mean, complete bloody nonsense. So we knew that he'd been murdered. The critical thing was to try and get the evidence and to find out how and why. And so we were determined to prevent a cover-up, which we then duly did. And there was an inquest, and all the terrible details came out. Although the magistrate, who was a guy called Prince, Magistrate Prince, P-R-I-N-S, he came to the conclusion that nobody could be held responsible for Steve Biko's death, which was just farcical. But by then we had everything out on the table.
And did you feel some vindication after the
Yes, I did.
inquest
Yes,
process?
I did. Not that it, you know, I mean, that was the point at which I had to move out of my flat because I was getting death threats and all sorts of things. I lived in Hillbrow in a flat. And I had to move out, and it was really drama, the normal drama.
What was it like taking the decision to move from journalism into politics?
Well, I never made that decision really because Alistair Sparks was fired from the Rand Daily Mail, and I was furious about that. And then I resigned myself. I tried to fight from a rearguard action as much as I could, but then I said no. And I thought the Rand Daily Mail would never be the same again because it was pandering to another target market, and so I resigned.